the end of the day.
And that's what I really want to get to next, because the last two times these teams have met, it's gone down to the wire. It was, I think, a 10-6 game back a few years ago, and then last year it was a game-winning field goal by Evan Price. And both of these teams have had a lot of struggle kicking field goals this year. I think Colorado's 2 for 5, Stanford's 0 for 4. So I wanted to ask this question. It may come down to a field goal game again. It may come down to some other play. But at the end of the game, who's going to have the advantage?
I think, as crazy as this is going to sound, I think I've got faith in Colorado for the following reason, which is that, as you mentioned, Evan Price was the one who kicked the winning field goal against Stanford last year, despite the fact that James Stefano, who just retired after the game last weekend, was our starting kicker both last year and this year, and actually 2 years ago as well. So Stefano was the starting kicker for that entire time, but he was sort of plagued by injuries for a lot of his career, which is why part of what he mentioned was part of his reasoning in going to Carl Durrell and just kind of feeling like he wasn't able to sort of play at the level that his teammates were sort of expecting of him, or how he felt his teammates were expecting of him, and sort of, passing that baton to Evan Price. But Evan Price is not sort of your standard backup kicker because he's had so much experience thus far, given Stefano's injuries. So I've got to say that, especially given, Price, the way that Price has sort of proven himself previously, particularly just coincidentally with Stanford, I think that I have a lot of faith in Evan Price. But I don't know if maybe you would say that from, your perspective, that 0 for 4 last week was a matter of, a rainy night in Eugene, as can be expected up in Oregon, and whether that could look different in Stanford Stadium.
Yeah, no one expects what Jet Toner did last week to continue or ever happen again. That was the worst day of his kicking career, and no one expects it to happen again because he's been so good throughout his career. Had an injury last year that kept him out of the second half of the season, recovering from that. But he'd been good all throughout camp. He'd been making field goals in the pregame from much farther than where he missed from in the game. No one thought that was going to happen. Still, though, I'm going to give the edge to Colorado at the end of the game because, one, Evan Price, and just because Colorado's been in those moments recently. Most of Stanford's team hasn't been in games that have come down to the wire and the ones that they have been in, they've lost, right? There was the one against Colorado last year, which was just unfortunate in how the defense was unable to get any stops when they needed to. Chenault had a 4th down conversion. Just everything went wrong. They had a loss to Cal at the end of the year where Chase Garbers had a run into the end zone and got the axe and all of that. And the last time Stanford was in a close game was against Oregon State last year. But that was against Oregon State, and it did come down to a game-winning field goal, and Jet Toner made it as expected because he is that kind of quality kicker. The coaches joke he's from Hawaii, so they say he has like a cool Hawaiian breeze because he's normally so calm. And that's what really surprised everyone as they were watching on TV last week, and the coaches and players as they were next to him on the sideline, is that he just seemed a little bit unnerved, right? There was the first one that he just missed. The second one, he got the laces. And then after that, he was in his head. He was in his head throughout the rest of the night. And this is a player who's rarely, if ever, in his head. And that's why I think Colorado has a chance, just because Stanford hasn't been in close games. They've lost their last 5. They haven't won in a calendar year. They haven't won in such a long time. If it comes down and it is a close game at the end, I don't think Stanford has the mental capacity, whereas Colorado has won 3 of their last 4. They've won in close games. It just seems that if Stanford can't get a big lead, Colorado has a mental edge.
So Stanford does have this stat going of the home win streak, right? I think home opener win streak, right? Which it's I want to say it goes back something like 12 years, if I have that, and correct me if I have that number wrong. But obviously, what is a home field advantage in the age of the coronavirus, right? I mean, you guys have 427 trees in your stadium. I mean, there's that, and you didn't have to travel today, which is perhaps a legitimate advantage. But certainly, it's the kind of thing where, when that game comes down to the wire, you don't have the advantage of being able to have a crowd go crazy, or have, the incomparable Leland Stanford Junior University marching band go absolutely berserk as you're trying to kick a field goal last minute. Nor, is it in Boulder where sometimes the like the altitude can play with things as well. I would say that that could be an X factor that plays in Stanford's favor, just given the fact that Evan Price is used to kicking field goals, throughout camp, and then last week at like 5,300 feet. It's just a little bit above a mile, like a little bit more than a mile above sea level. And so that's something they always talk about with the Broncos and stuff as well, that whenever teams come to town, it's like, oh, there's going to be 60-yard field goals, this, that, the other thing. And, so whether that will actually, and Evan Price grew up in Colorado, so, he's been kicking field goals in Colorado, pretty much his entire life. But I mean, when it comes to being a college kicker, whether that slim bit of altitude actually is what's going to make the difference between you nailing a field goal when the game's on the line or, leaving it short, I don't know whether that's really going to be what ultimately is sort of the deciding factor. And so I think, to your point, I think it's possible that Evan Price might have the slight edge. But I think overall, in terms of the two teams sort of, taking this head-to-head, there's obviously some gaping holes on both sides of, the ball for both teams. And, so exploiting it's just really, I think, going to come down to more a matter of which team's able to exploit the other team more, rather than which team's, offense or defense or special teams is going to be more sort of outright dominant, just because I think you might agree that neither team has a particularly just completely dominant offense or defense, rush defense, like deep secondary, or special teams.
Yeah, I see that exactly. And the home field advantage is going to be something that we're going to have to watch for. I was walking by the stadium yesterday and I was hearing the piping crowd noise, and it's a little bit different. Also weird on a Thursday afternoon to be hearing a crowd for a game that's not happening. So it's going to be different. The one, the only, the truly incomparable Leland Stanford Junior University Marching Band will not be there. They have some audio apparently from some of their songs, but I don't know why anyone would want to listen to that. But Stanford is, as you said, they're able to not travel today. They have their schedule, they have their routine. That may count for something. I don't know. We'll have to wait to find out. It's going to be an interesting when it comes down to the wire, because you're not going to have the fans. You're not going to have the raucous atmosphere. It's going to be weird. Everything about this season is weird. That's why we're so excited to see what happens.
Yeah, and I think the final thing that is sort of, we're really only going to know come game time tomorrow whether this ends up being a factor or not, is as it was last week, whether there's any sort of positive COVID tests or not. Particularly, I would expect if there were to be one on either side of the of the football, I would expect it to be on the Colorado side, just because I've got to imagine that, while they're traveling, just the team and stuff like that, and they've been sort of extremely close quarters. Most of the football team tends to live on campus here in Boulder, compared to where sort of the rest of the majority of the student body lives, which is more on the west side of campus and stuff. So they have done they're in an area where they're able to be pretty secluded and stuff. But I've got to imagine that sort of just getting out of their normal routine, getting on a plane, and then, staying in the hotel, whatever. You never know. With this virus, you just never know what you could come across, and, what kind of curveball that could throw tomorrow. And ultimately, we haven't heard anything yet, but if we were to hear anything about that, it would likely be at game time tomorrow. That could obviously, that's sort of the great unknown with any game this season. And, as we saw it play out last weekend for the Cardinal, and we'll likely see it play out for every team sort of going forward, from here on out. And so I think it'll be really, really interesting to see, hopefully, knock on wood, that doesn't, play a factor, and that we're sort of able to see these teams sort of as full strength as possible, sort of go head to head at Stanford Stadium.
And we both want to see them at full strength. That's ideal in any situation, and unfortunate, but almost inevitable in a pandemic season that you're going to have those tests. Stanford had it last week. It ends up being basically a false positive. It was a process error. Pac-12 is going to use whatever language they want to use, but it's just unfortunate that that's how we've had to have it, and that Stanford lost their starting quarterback, a starting wide receiver for last game, didn't get a true picture of what they could have looked like against Oregon. Real quick, final score prediction.
My final score prediction, I'm going to say 13-10 And I'm going to say that Colorado manages to get the win at Stanford Stadium tomorrow, 1:30 Mountain Time, 12:30 Pacific Time. How about yourself?
I'm going to go 24-14 Stanford. I don't know. I don't trust the close game, but thank you so much for being on the show. Really, really appreciated all of your takes.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Catch Buffalo Dash next Monday at 5 Pacific. Kieran and Jason Marks will be there. If you liked me, you can watch Cardinal Dash next Tuesday at 6. King Jemison and I always have it. And then follow Dash Sports, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, at Dash Sports TV. That's where you get all the information. For Kieran Murphy, I'm Daniel Martinez-Crams. Kickoff in just 16 hours.